My father came over from Japan in 1899, and I think he learned how to play gidayu and jorori in Japan before he came over, because he never went back. Gidayu is a shamisen, but it has sort of a lower, almost like an alto shamisen sound to it. And he was the only teacher here in Los Angeles before the war who taught gidayu and jorori. I think it was, you had to have a parent that was interested in Japanese odori or kabuki so that they would have their daughters do it. I would make friends through kabuki and through dance, but they were not the friends that I played with at home. They were probably busy taking piano lessons and things like that, which I wish I wanted to learn piano, but my mother said, when you get older, you can't carry a piano with you to play, but you could always carry a shamisen with you. So it's better to learn the shamisen. I think I insisted to my parents that I wanted to learn dancing, because back in those days they would have Nisei Week festivals, and then they had the ondo dancing, and everybody was invited to dance in the ondo. So I used to always dance in all the ondo parades, and my mother would carry me on her back, and we'd be running up and down the street, and I loved to dance, and so I begged my mother to let me have dancing lessons. And so even in probably as hard as it was right after the Depression times, they probably couldn't afford really to have me take dancing lessons. I think I must have insisted so much that they allowed me to take dancing. My first love was dancing, and kabuki came probably because my father was the gidayu teacher, and my father was not the teacher of the kabuki. He was just a singer on the side narrating the play. So he didn't teach the kabuki. But there's a very famous kabuki play that I love, that I was in. It's an old Japanese story, and I don't know if it was true or not, but they said it was true. And I would learn my lines because I speak English, and I didn't know what I was saying in Japanese, and they would give me these lines. So I would say the lines, and then I had no emotion. So my father told me the story one day of the play. I couldn't practice anymore because I'm crying so much that they have to stop rehearsal. And then my father has crying so bad that he has to stop playing, and the woman that's playing the mother, she can't go on anymore because she's crying, and we're all sitting there crying. So anyway, that's one play in kabuki. So it's a very famous play in Japan. Japanese odori could be classical or it could be contemporary, depending on the music. Fujima Kansuma was known for ryukoka, which was a more contemporary style dancing. And the other Japanese odori, natori teachers would teach the more classical form. So a lot of the younger people like the newer contemporary style. It was very popular before the war. Kansuma dancers had a regular studio where we practiced dancing here in Little Tokyo, and that was sort of a studio behind a store. And in those days, not too many women drove. There was one woman driver, and she would pick up everybody and take us downtown, or we would come down on a streetcar. And then after practice, we would run around Little Tokyo and bother all the store owners, read their comic books and things like that. Because she started teaching in 1937 here after she got back from Japan. So she was like a young girl then. I think she was only around 16 or 17 when she came back from Japan. And she was a natori at that time. I think she was almost a genius in the sense of being able to choreograph dances from songs and tell the story. I don't think she encouraged people to make up dances, but she herself, I think she was creative. She had a very creative mind and style, and I think she wasn't afraid to take risk. And most of the other Natoris, the dancers, the dance teachers were very stayed in their mold and their classical teaching, and you didn't break from that, whereas she experimented and broke from that. If you were a consummate dancer, you didn't really learn the classics as much. She had a few classical dances that she taught, but most of the dances were more contemporary. It's incredible. I don't know how she would give us things to say, like in our kabuki dances, like in this Tabigasa Dochu, or the old samurai language. And she was able to incorporate that in her dances, and I think that was part of her genius, that she could do that. I remember she did a dance that it was first to be performed for the Japanese merchant ships or the Navy ships that came here to the harbor. And we all got on stage and we wore these sailor suits, and we had Hinamaru rising sun flag, and we would dance for the sailors on ship. And then later on when we were in camp, we would dance these same dances, but then we held American flags, you know, so she would change. We danced at the Hollywood Bowl, and we had an American flag and a Japanese flag. We weren't wearing Japanese kimonos. It must have been for a special program. And we all had, I have a picture of it where we all are in sailor suits and we have our little Japanese flags or American flags. So this was about maybe 1940. But again, we had another dance where we were like airplanes with the two fans going up like this, and then we would soar all over and dance. And we had, at that time, Japanese rising sun fans. But in camp, when we danced the same dance, it was silver and gold without the Japanese flags on it, you know. The kabuki that my father taught, stories that are taken from the feudal days of Japan. They would sing it, the story, and they would narrate the story, and then the people on stage, when you see a kabuki act, a stage play, you see all the actors doing all the different parts. And then on the side, you'll hear a man and a man playing the shamisen, which my father did, and he would teach the person sitting next to him the vocal part, and he would sing the lyrics, and he would be telling the story of what the actors are doing on stage. And in Japan, all your kabuki actors are men. Here in Los Angeles, all the kabuki actors were women, young girls, because there were no men. For some reason, I don't know how that happened, but the women would play men parts and the women parts and the children parts. It was very popular in Los Angeles. The Tomofuku Nakamura Kabuki, Shodo Kabuki, was the only kabuki group here in Los Angeles, and there might be one up north, but I think they traveled up north and performed up north too. Yeah, no one from Japan. They were all local young girls, maybe around 16, 17, 18, and I was 9 at the time. And we would practice right here on First Street in a hotel room on the 2nd floor, and that would be our practice place. There were plays done at the Yamato Hall, which is no longer here, but it was a big hall where I heard later on that they had gambling downstairs, and then upstairs was a big, huge auditorium. And we would be upstairs there all day long performing. Different Natori teachers would probably teach dancing, and then their students would perform. Maybe Kansuma would do some, maybe another dancing teacher would have her students do some, and then some people would do the shamisen and the singing. And then always at the end you had what we call it oshibai, and that was the kabuki play. So they would do several a year. And in the audience, people would eat bento all day, and then the kids would look under the curtain to see what's going to happen next, you know. It was like a family gathering, almost. I think probably not very professional. I remember my father had to turn in his radio down at the police headquarters. Anything Japanese was all broken up and put in a pile. And my father had some recordings of his gidayu. We broke up all those recordings and we burned it all in our backyard before we went into camp. Even my mother broke her Japanese dishes, and I think a lot of Japanese families did this so that you wouldn't be caught with anything Japanese. I think they must have been frightened, didn't know what was going to happen to them next. And I think a lot of older Issei's, just when they went to camp, probably their health started to deteriorate at that time. I was taking Japanese kabuki and also Japanese odori dancing. My teacher was Fujima Kansuma. My kabuki teacher was Tomofuku Nakamura. And when the war broke out and there were rumors of everyone having to go to camp, the people that were in kabuki here in Los Angeles and the people that played the shamisen and the people that did the odori, they all wanted to go into camp together. My father being a teacher of the gidayu, the men that were his students all said, we want to go with our teacher. So we all signed up together, and then as a result, we all ended up in the same camp. Santa Anita racetrack, where we lived in the stables for 6 months. And then from there, our family moved to Aurora, Arkansas. My Japanese odori teacher, Kansuma, was in Aurora. So I continued to take dancing lessons. I remember that. And I think Kansuma, no, her choreography was very different. Her costumes tend to be probably flashier. I don't know if that's the right word. She was a very strict teacher in those days. I hear she's not like that anymore. But in those days, when we sat there, we had to sit with our legs folded under us, and we sat there for hours. And you could not sit on a chair. You couldn't lean on one way or the other. You had to sit chanto. And you weren't allowed to speak English in her classroom. You only could speak Japanese. And one time, she was passing out manju in a box, and I took one and I said, thank you. And she said, nani? And I'd say, thank you again, and I would say, thank you very much. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. And then a girl next to me says, arigato. Oh, yes, arigato. So she was very, very strict. And while we were dancing, if we made a mistake, she would make us do it over and over and over till we got it correct. Our hands, our feet, everything had to be just perfect. You can't sit down until you got it down perfect. And so even if you cried, even if you had tears coming down your face, you can't sit down until you learn how to do it correctly. She was very, very strict in that way. There was a very popular Japanese song called Tabigasa Dochu. It's the song of the wandering samurai leaving his girlfriend. The girlfriend follows him. So the dance is of the two of them. And it was very popular. So it was in such demand that we used to have to dance this almost every week in camp. We went from mess hall to mess hall. I used to cry before each performance. I don't want to do this anymore. I hate this. I'm tired of doing the same thing over and over. It's just, oh, well, one more time, you know, get back on stage one more time. I think the older Issei's loved this dance and this story, so we were asked to do it a lot. I don't think the younger people cared too much because they were busy with their own Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey music. I don't think they really cared about Japanese music at the time. In fact, I saw Kansuma dancing once, foxtrot. She says, "Oh, I know how to do that," and she was doing the foxtrot, you know. So that was kind of a kick to see her do Western style dancing. You know. In camp, I think mostly the large production number that was done at the new auditorium, it seems to me that they were all formal kimonos. And so somewhere, somehow, somebody must have brought it into camp, because you can't make those formal kimonos easily by hand, I don't think. But the staging, they had flowers coming down from the ceiling, and all of those flowers were made by the parents, paper flowers. I remember that. And this scenery was painted on a canvas, and I think the parents did that. So I think it was a large part, the parents put in a lot of work to put on a performance there. I also learned Nagauta and shamisen from another woman. Her name was Lily Uematsu. Now, she was not a natori, but she was a young girl. One of the first pieces that I learned to play on the shamisen was Swanee River. And we would just kind of fool around with American songs. I think she probably tried to make it easier for us to learn shamisen. Yeah, it felt strange, but it was fun, you know. So, and she would encourage us to play different songs on the shamisen, I think. Yeah, she was younger, so I think she had a younger mindset. She was not the formal type of older Japanese teacher who made you sit there, you know. Part of the reasons that my mother sent me to Japanese Odori school was to learn manners, the Japanese manners, and so to bow in the right way, to sit the right way, and wear the kimono and walk in the kimono the proper way. I think my mother used to say she sent me to school to learn ogyogi. They used to call it ogyogi, which meant etiquette. My father was a gardener before the war, and I would come home from school and he would be teaching. So I guess after gardening, he must have had his students come over and learn Gedayu. And in camp too, like I say, I don't remember hearing him play. It might have been that being sent to camp was really devastating to him. And he probably didn't, I don't know if he didn't want to play, but I know that I think it did a lot to a lot of the Japanese Issei's in the sense of giving up hope, not knowing what's going to happen to them next. And maybe that was part of it too. He never really regained his health after going to camp. My mother made my kimono. She would order material from Montgomery Ward's or Sears Roebuck, and she sewed a kimono for me. So I've heard later on that Kansuma-san was allowed to go back to Los Angeles to pick up some things and bring it back into camp. So I was about, 20, I guess, when I quit Japanese dancing, became more involved in things that were more the American culture. Yeah. And then after the war, her students would dance like in The Geisha Boy or in the movies. And I did one for her, The Geisha Boy with Jerry Lewis. I did another dance in Barbarian the Geisha. Barbarian Geisha was John Wayne. And the girl was Eiko Ando. She was from Japan. She was a 6-foot-tall burlesque dancer, playing the part of Commodore Perry's girlfriend in the movie Barbarian the Geisha. That was fun. So, so yeah, it carried over into movies. I think it's very, very expensive now. I think that's probably the saddest part of trying to maintain Japanese traditional dancing. I don't know personally, but I have heard that it's very expensive to learn and to get all the Japanese kimonos. But I find that there are more and more Japanese coming from Japan now, the new generation of young people coming from Japan, and they seem to bring with them shamisen and like the Minyon. There's a group called the Minyo Station, young Japanese who are now making their homes here from Japan, and they seem to be bringing a whole new era of Japanese culture. But I think you've lost most of the sansei, yonseis, who have also intermarried too. Like my own children, none of my children know how to do Japanese dancing. They had no knowledge of my doing Japanese dancing. They have no knowledge of my parents or my father, what he did or anything. My granddaughter, she takes dancing, she takes ballet, tap, and modern dancing, but I don't think there's any interest in learning Japanese dancing. But language is another thing too. They're all into your pop music, and I might take them to see Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera, but I don't take them to see Japanese kabuki because it's so expensive. It's bad enough trying to go see Phantom of the Opera or Les Mis. Before the war, Little Tokyo was really self-contained, and the stores were here, your churches, the people were living here. By segregation too, discrimination, we couldn't live in other parts of the city. Now you can live anywhere you want. But I think a lot of people have intermarried too, so I'm thinking of my own children who went to school in San Fernando Valley. Coming to Little Tokyo, they would come here to have fun maybe, but I don't think they would come for a cultural event. It's kind of sad that the younger generation, the sanseis and yonseis, we haven't passed on this love of our Japanese culture to them. You're so used to pop music and movies and sports events. I don't think I've ever talked about the kabuki plays to my children, or my grandson, or my granddaughters. But I think we take it for granted that they're not interested. I think we take it for granted that they're into their sporting, playing basketball, or the ballet, or their tap dancing, or the hip-hop dancing, and we don't think of even talking about our Japanese culture. And I think that's kind of sad that we don't do that.